Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name's Chris,
I'm Karen.
and the project that we're talking about this morning is Strong Women Hessle Road. Just as a sort of little bit of context about this project, the whole idea is there is a group of ladies who live in the Hessle Road area, who for some years now have decided to kind of engage in the past, the background, the upbringing, the current context in quite an impoverished area of Hull through arts. They've tried other means in the past, but we were originally paired together because I'm a creative writing tutor, and my experience is in life writing and sort of helping people to talk about their experiences in the form of writing. And so we got together with the means of helping these groups explore their own experiences in the form of writing. So we're just going to quickly run through some of the successes, the upcoming outputs, the processes that we went through, and why this particular fund has been really unique for us. So one of the biggest successes is the relationships that we've built between myself and the group members. When this group was first being established, I think I was warned, I don't know if it was by yourself, Karen, basically saying it might be a tough crowd. I'm sort of used to teaching creative writing in university contexts, and I was warned that this might be quite different. And it certainly was, but I think perhaps in a really positive way. Anybody here who teaches will probably be very aware with the old situation where you sort of you pose a question to the group, or you ask someone else's opinion, and there's the tumbleweeds, and you're sort of like trying to encourage group engagement. Whereas with this group, I think I entered and I must have asked one question of like, what do you guys want to do with this group? And then I could just almost just sit back and my pen was on fire trying to keep up with all the answers that were coming from everybody. When we first started, it was a really welcoming group, but what I suppose I didn't realise at the time was that we were kind of only just scratching the surface, and that kind of level of trust, that level of engagement was only going to deepen in time.
And I think it did help because Chris was a similar age to those people that he was going to be working with, and they kind of saw him as a younger brother.
Yeah, I'd recently had a kid for the first time, and some of the sessions we had to be careful that they didn't descend into parenting advice for quite a lot of the sessions. But food started being bringing in. I think at one point I used to get the mick taken out of me. At one point they said if I'd turned up at the school gates, everyone would have thought I was a social worker. Just kind of highlighting perhaps the differences in the ways that we dress. But that bond was constantly kind of being deepened throughout these sessions, which was fantastic. So also worth noting is the relationship between university and groundworks as well.
Yeah, we've come to we've shared a lot of experiences, a lot of kind of ups and downs on this journey, and it's not always been the easiest of processes. We had to write the bid together, and we wanted this bid to be this project to be truly co-designed. So we had an idea of what we wanted, but that journey wasn't ours to control, and so actually writing the bid was quite scary, not knowing where we were going to go.
Yeah, absolutely. It could have gone anywhere. I think we both were sort of saying towards the start, the whole idea is we're placing so much of the trust and the power and that responsibility in the community themselves. Like we were asking them in the sessions, like, where do you want this to go? What is it you want to come out the other side of this? What is it that you want to develop, within yourselves and better understand? So it was very much kind of co-designed. So yeah, at the start, we honestly didn't know where we would end up sort of in several months' time. And I think, Karen and I were building trust among ourselves, between each other as well, sort of as the group progressed. There was a lot of unexpected things happening. One of the benefits of writing about yourself is you're uncovering things about yourself and really digging deep into your own experiences. But one of the dangers can also come from that as well, in that you might be uncovering things that are really difficult for you or even traumatic for you, and you might be entering really dark waters. And our group was starting to do that, sort of purely voluntarily wanting to sort of fully engage with the background that each of them have experienced. And there were sometimes safeguarding issues that we had to discuss between each other, and to make sure that people were being okay. There were some things that were being disclosed in the group and in the writing that we had to address. And even amongst ourselves, it was really impactful for us to work in those situations where that was what was being discussed week in and week out, really dark stuff. We had a PhD researcher who was helping us with it as well, and we would frequently debrief, sort of checking that we were all okay as well and what kind of impact this was having upon us. But the group were looking after one another. One of the sort of key moments, I think, as a breakthrough with group dynamics was when, after a particular difficult session that the group members had, the next time the session ran, somebody brought in what they called a care package, which was this pack up for everybody in the group that involved things like tissues for if you got upset. There were some sweets, there was some coffee packages and things like that. There was things just to, people were really starting to take care of one another. It had almost this feeling of starting to self-perpetuate a little bit.
And there was 2 separate groups, which was quite handy, as you'll later find out. But there was one pivotal moment when one of those in the second group brought some information, some newspaper clippings and articles about her own parents. She'd always scouted around the topic and said, but never dug really deep into her own emotions. And then one day she just arrived with these pile of newspaper clippings for us to have a look at. And that was a pivotal moment when we knew there was real trust.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we was also focusing on how this was. The clip has stopped working. How this was actually beneficial for the group members themselves.
There was one particular participant. She's employed. She has quite a stressful job. She works with members of the public. She also works with organisations. But up until this point from the project, her life was always a ups and downs and meandering from one crisis to another and one drama to another. And it's not to say those dramas have stopped, but the way in which she started to deal with those dramas, they're still there, but she's dealing with her personal life and her professional life in a much more composed and articulate and professional manner, and really pushing for her rights and what she thinks is needed and what should be done, but really in a much more cohesive and profound way than she was doing previously, and it's getting results. She set herself goals in her personal life, she set herself goals in her professional life, and actually she's achieving them.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had 2 different groups within this, and they ran at different times per week, and for whatever reason, purely by chance, they were very different in how they wanted to approach their storytelling. One group was writers, they had the pen and paper there ready by the second session, wanting to get on with it. The other group did not want to engage in the stories in that way throughout the entire project, and we had to start sort of working with them to decide how we would disseminate those stories in a different matter. And it was lucky that these 2 groups were separate and very different. We started to notice midway in, because it's a very small community, that some of the stories that one group was telling might involve a member from the other group, which would sort of create a bit of friction if they were all in the same room together. But the good thing about this was, despite that they had these very different approaches in how they explore the stories that they were telling, people were completely by chance in agreement as to what they wanted to do next. How did we want to disseminate this? What are we actually working towards in telling these stories and working upon our writing? And despite these 2 different paths that the different groups were taking, both agreed that they wanted to share the story via a play. This is the best way to amalgamate some of the different stories, make sure all of them are told, capture the voice of the individual, but at the same time not make them identifiable to the rest of the community. As we're saying, it is like a closed group, and we want this to be presented to the community, and a lot of people would, I think, identify themselves in it if we're not really careful with this. And so both groups individually settled on the idea of creating a play together, which really played into the fact that this was a fully co-designed project. So the play, no fucking excuse. as it's titled. This kind of really evocative working title was nominated by our group members, and what it represents is the idea that was a thread through much of our discussions, which is taking responsibility for one's actions. You may have seen on that first slide there was a quote from one of our group members to do with saying, "The domino stopped with me." Many of our group members have experienced past traumas, past abuses, a series of really sort of unfortunate events within the past that they've seen trickle down from generation to generation. And one of the key goals by engaging in it with writing is to stop that, is they're very aware of what they're now passing on to the next generation. So when they say things like "no fucking excuse," what they were referring to is not letting all of that affect how you're now raising the next generation coming up.
Yeah, they desperately didn't want their children to go through what they'd been through or kind of what they were dealing with, but also they didn't want other people who clearly within that community they believe are still going through those same things. There's no excuse to put your child through what you experienced, but also for service providers as well. No excuses for dealing with these communities in the way they were dealing with them.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're on to the stage now. This is our lovely drawing that Karen and I did a few weeks ago, of sort of considering where we are in our timeline. At the moment, we've been lucky enough to capture the money to go into the second phase of this project, which is now got our eyes on dissemination. And whilst we're sort of working on the play, we're also asking ourselves where else this project can be applied to. We're thinking of other communities. Some of the patterns in what the women have been through in this particular sort of pool of participants, we're very aware that there's only a tiny representation from Hessle Road, let alone other parts of Hull. So we're very keen to sort of apply this same project in other places.
And also other communities, because what we're concerned about is that if some of our poorest communities in Hull have these experiences, if someone's trying to get away from that, if they've got no money, they'll go to another city, to another poor community that may have exactly the same issues, and it's got to change.
Yeah. So I'll quickly battle through the last couple of slides. One, also, the ladies are very conscious that I was sat there taking notes in every single session, and the notebooks were slowly piling up. And I think this assumption that I was writing a book started to come into play, even though I never said that I was going to, until eventually, to punctuate the end of an anecdote, somebody would often say, "Put that in your book," when they finish saying something. So I feel like I've kind of unofficially been obliged to at one point make this happen. But also, the process itself has been absolutely fantastic. Initially it was really frightening. We had no idea where it would go, from the application to the pre-application process. We had this very much kind of, wondering what the future would hold for something like this. But I think the best thing that the Ideas Fund has granted to us is something that many different funding opportunities didn't, and that's time.
Yeah, we weren't target driven, we weren't output driven. We had the time to develop relationships, and also to give the women the voices, the time to hear those voices, and the time those voices deserved.
Yeah. It was necessary to sort of establish those relationships. The stories that we have now that are going to feed into the output would never have happened had we not been granted that sort of time to build the strong bonds between one another and between researcher and participants as well. So that's what we think has been the best thing about this. Yeah, thank you. We'll leave it there.